I am very glad and honored that Professor Wilfred Lajul from Uganda took all the way from his home country to come to Hildesheim to stay with us about 2 weeks here to discuss several issues from the philosophies in Africa and to deliver his lecture here tonight. Professor Wilfred is Professor of Philosophy at the Department of Religious Studies and Philosophy at the University of Gulu, or Gulu University in the north of of Uganda, and he is there currently also the head of department. Since 1988 already, he has taught African philosophy and other subjects such as ethics, epistemology, metaphysics, logic, and political philosophy in various institutions, including the Makerere University in Uganda. Professor Lajul, in his long academic life, published widely. So some of the books you see here on the table, I just want to mention one book which just recently came out, namely last year, and which is closely linked to the paper he will present today, namely African Philosophic Sagacity in Selected African Languages and Proverbs. And I would also like to hint to another book which just came out last week, right? Under the title Philosophy, Language and Literature in an African Context. We are very happy to have you here and that you will share your knowledge with us. The title of the paper today is The Relevance of Proverbs in African Philosophy, Philosophizing from an African Perspective. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm greatly honored by Professor Anke, whom we have met with earlier in Uganda in 2023. I did not know her earlier, but through contacts with African Philosophy Society, who were preparing for a world conference on African philosophy in the university where I teach. And she was one of the keynote speakers. We were greatly honored by her presence and the presence of 5 other keynote speakers from all over Africa and the world. So I am really, really grateful to the university for having offered me this opportunity to come and share some of my findings. Definitely I cannot share everything, but I will hint on one major thing. So I am honored and I'm grateful. So as you have already mentioned, the topic I'm speaking on is relevance of proverbs in African philosophy, philosophizing from an African perspective. To come to this topic, I needed a long story, but we don't have the time. But you should know in Uganda, we have several institutions of philosophy, but most of them are missionary founded. I personally studied in one of those missionary founded institutions. And I did philosophy for 3 full years. And after 3 years, I did theology, and I got a degree also in theology for another 3 years. And then later I came and did Masters of Philosophy in Rome, and also a PhD in Rome. But as he has mentioned, since 1988, the philosophy I knew was basically European philosophy. And all my lecturers were mainly Europeans, missionaries, in their various capacities. By that time, there were very few African, we call it, philosophers who could teach us. But there were also some who were very, very good. And they were being groomed to become maybe the teachers in the areas of philosophy. And later, when I started teaching in Makerere University, which is in 2021, I've been there for almost 20 years before I moved to Gulu University. We did a lot of things. Some of these books you see were produced when I was still in Makerere. Like this one here, I produced it when I was in Makerere. And this one, also when I was in Makerere. This was published by Makerere University Press. And there's several journal articles. But some of these books, which you can now see lately, like this one, plus this, and this, and this, and this. You cannot see them because I know they will give you. All this one I produced mostly when I was now in Gulu. And people were wondering, how do I get the time? But always when there's a will, there's a way. But the point is not about the books so much, it's about the content of what I want to present. And the content of what I'm going to present, as already the title given, is to discuss one of the topics in African philosophy, which is called African philosophic sagacity. African philosophic sagacity, it is a philosophy that was originated by Henry Odera Oruka, a Kenyan professor. He is now dead, but he initiated, and it was a very powerful initiative on his part, and he published a lot. There was a lot of discussion. What is this African philosophic sagacity? If I had enough time, I would really go into details. But in brief, it is wisdom philosophy. They wanted to find out, in the African cultures, in the African way of life, is there a brand of philosophy? Is there a wisdom philosophy that can be captured, can be understood? And of course the answer is what Odera Oruka did, but now the question was, what is then that philosophy? How does it look like? And he started by saying, look, that philosophy is done by individuals who use rational abilities and who have the capacity to disagree with the cultural practices of their people. That was the main gist of the discussion. And that was what went on for a long time. But now when I started writing, reading, and teaching, I found out that that was a very narrow description of what is called philosophic sagacity. Because when you take the elders of Africa, they are now dying out one by one. And he wrote about 50 years, almost 50 years ago. So what about if all the elders are dead? Will that philosophy still remain? That was a big question. Then I thought we should broaden the understanding of African philosophic sagacity. And how do we broaden it? By looking into African languages, by looking into African wisdom sayings, by looking into African proverbs. And some of these proverbs are already committed to writing. When I was writing this book, I was amazed to find several publications in different languages. One of them is Luganda, which is a main language in Uganda, have a book of 5,000 proverbs. The culture from which I came is called it's called Choli. There are two books published by different authors. One of them is a well-known author called Pabitek. So again, these are written for communication, but nobody has taken interest to look at them critically to find out what do they offer in terms of philosophy. In terms of literature, maybe in terms of other culture, people use them a lot. But the question is, from the philosophical point of view, what do you get out of this? So this is the basis of the book. Then I say, all right, let me now take my time to take two languages of Africa, Luganda and Acholi, look at their proverbs critically and try to fish out what is philosophic about them. And of course, though we use the language in relation to the proverb, my interest is more in the proverbs. So then in this lecture, we shall reflect on the definitely the relevance of these proverbs to African philosophy. That's actually the key. The outline is already what I've given here. Is it clear? It's not clear. Okay. The outline is what I've given here. I will give the introduction, and I will look at proverbs, metaphysical proverbs, if you like. Particularly in only two areas, because this book talks about them, but in very many areas. I will look at the concept of the human person. I will look at the concept of freedom. I will look at theory of knowledge, what is called epistemology. I will look at moral philosophy, just briefly as a highlight, to help us see how proverbs can be used to identify philosophy in this writing. So, and that is what I've already mentioned already. The intention is to use one of these sources. So Proverbs is only one of the sources of African philosophy. So it is wrong to say Proverbs are philosophical in themselves. No. It is in the proverb that we find philosophy. Proverbs contain so many things, morality, what, culture, other values. But among the different things Proverbs give are philosophical contents. And that's what I was focusing at. Philosophy then, what is philosophy in this view? Philosophy in this paper, with this presentation, is defined as intellectual history of human thought. This is a very generalized definition of philosophy. And it is also understood differently in the different parts of the world. From the Western perspective, this critical study of rational history of Western history, starting from all over those of Socrates, Aristotle, we are studying the rational history of Western thinkers and their thoughts. And in Africa, we talk about the rational history of the African peoples. And here is where the problem begins. The Africans did not have the writings, they did not have documented materials. So where will you go when you don't have documented materials? Where will you trace their histories? Where will you trace their philosophy? So people have taken different options. Some have gone to the cultures of the people to produce what's called ethnophilosophy. Some have taken wisdom saying, and we are dealing about philosophic sagacity. Some actually have taken hermeneutical studies, hermeneutical philosophy. Some have taken different strands of this. How do we enter into that study? But in this book, the entry is only one. We want to look at the languages, wise sayings, and proverbs. That is the only angle we have taken to derive some of the philosophical content I will share with you shortly. In the Western philosophy, this rational history, of course, can be traced only through writings. Without writing, you may not have that philosophy at all. What about in the oral traditions of the African people? How shall we trace it? I will later try to help you to see. Human thought in the perspective of African philosophy does not only use reason to derive knowledge. Human thought employs both reason and other faculties to derive knowledge. But Writing is also only a way of preserving what you have thought out. Philosophy, it is not in writing. Philosophy, it is in thinking. It is in thinking where we find philosophy. But in cultures where the writing is a tradition, it is preserved through writing. But in other contexts, they are preserved by other means. And Proverbs is one of the means of preserving. It's one of the means of preserving those thinking. So this is preserved and passed on orally in the past, but today now is through writing. And we are now putting some of these things down. In these traditions and cultures, there is also individuality. And this is also a point I want to get very clear. People think African society is communal, everything is communal, there are no individuals, so everything is common to everybody. This is not right. Why? Because, in my view, ideas cannot be produced collectively. Cannot. Ideas are always produced by individuals. But the individual doesn't need to be recorded in a book of history to know that that individual has produced idea. Simple people, common people. My grandmother, my grandfather, who maybe did not know how to read and write, they listen to what people say. They think on them. They change them. They move. Then when people share these ideas together, they believe in them. And it becomes their ethos, becomes their common value, which guides their society. They structure their societies along those thoughts. They build their houses. They train their children. They do their work. They produce their wealth on the basis of the basic knowledge they've collected together. But this knowledge, these ideas were not collectively brought together. They were engineered by individuals who work together, put piece and piece together, and as a bundle, they become whole and become something which is useful. And that is why Proverbs are, I will soon define what it is. This makes Proverbs one of the important sources of African philosophy. I'm saying it's not the only important source. It will be wrong to say, I think Proverbs is the only way. No. It is one of the ways. Then the society that is the custodian of this knowledge is equally active in its reception, interpretation, validation, or rejection on the basis of its usefulness. The Proverbs which we have today have metamorphosed, has changed a lot from their original versions. And because people receive them, people use them, what is not very useful, they drop, they bring in new elements. And that is the richness of Proverbs in African philosophy, even of other main ideas. This means the society does not passively receive such body of knowledge, but assesses it, interprets it, and oftentimes improves and adapts it for their respective societies. You go to Africa, you see how people build houses. They look similar, but they're all different. Because every individual has its own skill and style to modify how it should look like, how it should be, internally and externally. And this is the creativity that comes with reception of ideas within society. And this is the basis of understanding Proverbs as sources of philosophical ideas. Now, I want to define Proverbs. What are Proverbs? Proverbs in this paper is understood as condensed value statements. These are condensed value statements or knowledge idioms of different cultural communities in Africa. Surely, not all Proverbs are philosophical in nature, but some are truly philosophical because they contain very deep philosophical ideas. They are not only individual ideas of their originators, and that is the point I want to emphasize. But equally the philosophical thinking of their societies within which they are derived. Because the society also modify them, change them. So when we have a proverb, it is very unlikely that it's only one person that has produced it. Somebody must have originated it, but people have changed it and adapted them to make them more relevant for human societies. In this presentation, I will highlight the key philosophizing in an African context. The key difference with Western context springs from the central view that the two parts of the world have different philosophical worldviews. I'm not saying they're having two antagonistic philosophies. That is really wrong. It's very important to know that African philosophy is not antithesis of Western philosophy. A lot of things are the same, but there also are things that are different, clearly different. You cannot mix it. I gave the other day an example. Many cultures, even in Africa, you don't have uniform philosophy. There are several. I gave an example of counting. In my language, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you go 5, 1, 5, 2, 5, 3, 5, 4, and 10. You see now? And yet the cultures in Africa will count 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10. 1, 2, 3. So they are not the same for sure. They are not the same. And you cannot say they were given by missionaries. No. They were not given by the colonialists. They found them reading like that. And you cannot claim that is not African. You cannot say it is African in the sense that it belongs to all Africa. No. It is originated among some of them, and they live by it, they use it, they count using it. Though philosophizing stems from a questioning mind, and that's also a point I want you to know. Every philosophy comes from a questioning mind. But differences in human worldviews make the resultant thinking vary. The same questioning mind, when you have two different lenses, let us say, I have my glasses here. If it is tinted blue, even if you are putting on a white shirt, it will look bluish. If it is reddish, it will look reddish. That is the worldview that changes the way we look at the very same realities. Contests over these differences were bitter and polemic during the contemporary period of human philosophical history. This created profound and deep walls of philosophical divide between Africa and the West. When I was doing my PhD in Rome, I wanted to write my thesis on African philosophy. Then my supervisor said, no, you know what? I believe, but I don't think you'll go far with it. Stop it. So I wrote about Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher. And I think I know about him more than some of you. I'm not saying all of you, because I read, and I had to learn German at that time, and to quote him in German. And I passed with my first class, but it was not a simple work. It was not but it's a very difficult work. But I had to leave. But when I went back, I said, okay, now you cannot control me. I will now do it. So the main cause of this bitter contest was basically lack of knowledge. Since the other part of the world knew very little about Africa. By the way, even the missionaries, they know a lot. They knew very little about Africa. They had very superficial contact. Yes, they get a bit of that language, but what that language means, they did not fully understand. Actually, right now, in my country, the books that were translated into vernacular by the missionaries are being revised, because the language is completely not in tandem with the local meaning. They use words that look similar, but has totally different meaning. They are changing them so that for relevance for today. It's not their fault. They did not have enough time. They did not have enough knowledge. It was not their fault. There were no grammar schools when they went to Africa to learn African languages. They were really great men and women. But they had to work with the limited knowledge they had. The effort of African thinkers and philosophers to narrow this gap through reflective dialogue and keen listening to each other is still going on. And I think this presentation, in fact, is a sign of this continuous dialogue. Central to these discussions are the philosophical worldviews. I already told you, I will just look at three. There are more than three. But I'm just briefly, also not to the details. I will look briefly at metaphysics, epistemology, and theory, and proverbs related to them. We shall try to understand African concept of human person and freedom, their concept of knowledge, their ethics, as they are derived from some of the selected African proverbs. This presentation is based on, of course, on my book that is already mentioned. Now, let's look briefly about metaphysics. Metaphysics is not a simple subject, but it's very interesting. Aristotle described metaphysics as the first philosophy because it is grounded in what is fundamental and ontologically independent. Tanko, one of the African writers, calls it the science of essence. Those definitions are not very different from each other. Of course, in Greek, the term means transcending the physical. Metaphysical, beyond the physical. While this understanding is generally accepted by most authors, the corresponding African perspective is not well acknowledged. Francis Tim, one of the African writers, thinks that African metaphysics reflects the African universe of experience and African existential realities. Philosophy is more than a collection of practices of proverbs. It's embedded in deep inner thinking. And I will show you briefly when we reach the proverbs. The arguments against the existence of African metaphysics are that metaphysics cannot be culturally bound. Metaphysical issues should not be regionalized so that it can make universal appeal. However, a team contends that authors like Karl Marx, you know that Karl Marx was a German, though he worked in Russia. He was not known for Russia, but he's a German. He supports the existence of regional or culturally derived metaphysics. These are Western thinkers. They believe, but then for us, we say, no. The reason is that philosophical worldviews are not universally the same all over the world. Then how can thought that are informed and shaped by these different worldviews be the same? If Western philosophy is centered on individuality of human thought, who is autonomous, free, and self-propelling, how can an African who thinks that a thinker is an individual who is ontologically related to others, to nature, and to God, produce the same thinking system of understanding, say of reality, knowledge, and ethics? It's not possible. In my book, I argue that though not all African philosophers agree on this understanding, and this also you have to be clear, when I talk like this, I'm not talking on behalf of all Africans. I'm talking on behalf of what I've studied, what I believe in. I argue that though not all African philosophers agree on this understanding of metaphysics, since they are divided between what I call extreme communalism and extreme individualism, the balance between the two seems to be the way to go. And that is a very deliberate choice I've made. I read a lot of African authors who think African are not only essentially, but irredeemably communal. All right? They are so, and later I will give you some of their definitions. Some say, no. Africans are also individuals who are related to one another. Now, why have I made a choice that I think both are important? I am well aware of varying opinions. I try to trace the root of this metaphysics on the human person, for example, and human freedom in African languages, especially the Proverbs. Here are some strong and clear differences in African cultures that give evidence to these two views of the human person. You will find in many African philosophers' writings those who think Africans are communal human beings. There's no individuality in Africa. They say, no. There are also individuals in Africa. Okay? You get these views. So, my point is, my choice is, of course, is that they are both. And let us see the reason. What is more important, however, are the reasons for this difference. In my book, I have realized that the differences in this strong opinion come from the two types of societies which are very common in Africa. The centralized society and the decentralized society. They are all there in Africa. The former tends to emphasize communalism to the extreme, and the latter tends to create some balance between the extreme individualism and African extreme communalism. Fortunately, I lived in these two types of communities in Uganda. I lived among the Baganda for over 20 years. This is the most centralized. These are the kingdom. The king who was so powerful, he killed the Uganda martyrs. He was so powerful that if he decides one word, it would be life or death. He would shoot an arrow in the air, and when the arrow falls on you, they will kill you. You see that kind of power. It was so absolute. And the people in this type of society have a certain way of thinking. But you go to northern Uganda, where we do not have a centralized kingdom, but you have chiefdoms, people are more liberal. Okay? They are more democratic in one way or another. So I've seen these two kinds of societies, and I lived among them. I was born and grew in a decentralized African society, but I studied and worked for more than 20 years in a centralized African society. From these two societies, I've learned that the difference between the centralized and the decentralized society lie only in emphasis. That's what I've realized. There's not negation one of the other. Emphasis. Now, let's look more concretely. There is one proverb which is very common and used by many African authors. It comes from basically centralized African societies. This proverb says, a person is a person because of other people. This word, even if I read for you, you may not understand, but you can see the writing there. Umuntu, ngumbuntu, ngabuntu. A person is a person because of other people. This has a lot of implications. A lot of implications. It has a lot of implications. And a lot of African philosophers have taken that direction, which I think is only one-sided way of look at things. And this is the context in which you can understand Mbiti, John Mbiti. Mbiti was one of the very first African philosophers who wrote, okay, on the Bantu philosophy. I am because we are, since we are, therefore I am. You can only understand this unless you have understood the culture from which that saying comes. On the contrary, and this is something funny, on the contrary, that Choli would say something very vulgar. And don't get scandalized, you're now mature enough. They say chun petude, meaning you cannot tie two penises in a knot. Sounds vulgar, no? Though this language is strongly masculine, in real sense, it is not about males, but about humans whose individuality cannot be dissolved into some communal entities. That's what it means. Those are proverbs. And they're all coming from the same African continent. In this philosophy, human personhood is rooted in individuality that is ontologically and harmoniously related with the other beings. And that is the point, which I think is a more grounding view. Relations in human society are derived from individual personalities collaborating or cooperating with one another, but not in dissolving differences in individuality in this ontological union. However cooperative we are, we don't disappear as individuals. We remain as the individual. But we must cooperate to exist, to coexist, to survive. They become one on account of cooperation, common interest, and shared well-being, each time respecting the differences in personalities and individualities. Okay, that's about human person. So human person, people talk, you will read a lot, but in my study, that is what I came out. The two emphases are there, but the right understanding from a number of these proverbs seem to be only when we understand cooperation in relation to individualities. Now, concept of freedom. For Walter Braga, he wrote a dictionary of philosophy, and he's the editor of that dictionary. But he also defined a number of terms. I have a copy of that book. When I was in Rome, I bought a full dictionary of philosophy, and I have it. When I have serious philosophical terms, I refer to them. These are purely Western. We shall soon write our own African dictionary of philosophy. But the concept of freedom. For Walter Braga, freedom is the state of not being forced or determined by something external, in as far as it is joined to a definite faculty of self-determination. Meaning, freedom is the absence of internal and external constraints inhibiting physical, moral, or psychological self-determination. Immanuel Kant, I read him properly. However, freedom has two dimensions or connotations. The negative freedom for Kant is the absence of internal and external constraints, and the positive is the capacity for self-determination and ability to commitment to self-chosen goals or values. The African perspective, on the other hand, takes freedom as determination to self-chosen goals regardless of the different constraints humans face in life, regardless. This is because Africans do not believe that to have freedom, one does not need to be set free from constraint first, whether internal or internal. It seems that is humanly impossible. I will explain. In fact, human freedom subsists in the ability for self-determination despite influences, internal or external. There are some proverbs. Here in this book, I have explained some of these proverbs in real detail. Their literal meaning, their common meaning, but their philosophical meaning. And I don't have the time, which I can do. So one is called Lewich Mi Chamawala. You see, in African context, this proverb is very important. You go as a visitor to visit somebody, but if this person is your enemy, serve you food which is poisoned, okay? You even know that this food is not good because this person doesn't will good for me. But if you are shy, you are going to eat it, okay? Because if I refuse, what will they say? They'll think I'm a bad man. I'm a bad woman. Then you eat. You will die not because of lack of knowledge. You die because of fear, lack of courage. So if you are shy, you eat poison. That's the proverb. In this sense, it is not ignorance about the right course of action, but lack of courage. You can go, since you don't have enough time, I'm just mentioning, but later you get this book, you read it, you get really the details about it. The second proverb says, "Lachan makope gerumine," a poor man does not sleep with his mother. Despite strong sexual instincts, humans exercise self-restraint and do not turn their mothers into their sexual partners. Okay? It is you have to restrain yourself. Your mother, your sister is a woman like any other woman. Okay? Your brother, your father is also a man like any other. But you exercise self-restraint. That's what true freedom is. The Baganda have a very interesting one. I don't need to read the Luganda version. I will read the English one. A dog with a bone in the mouth cannot bite. All right? Or they even put it the other way around. A hunter who is following an elephant does not stop to throw stone at birds. You are chasing an elephant and you see a bird, this bird is good, let me first shoot it. The elephant will go. The elephant will go. These two Uganda proverbs mean true freedom lies in undivided attention given to the course of action, not to the lack of distractions that come. Distractions will come. But it is your undivided attention that make you be truly free. The actually is also another one who say, let me read the English one. A guinea fowl chicks cannot be reared among chicken chicks. By nature, guinea fowls are not domestic animals. But by design, guinea fowls may be confined around human settlement by human beings. But as soon as the opportunity knocks, the guinea fowl escapes. Okay? You see, the implication here is similar to what I put here. Nelson Mandela was not, his freedom was not deleted by his 27 years imprisonment, because he essentially remained committed to the values of society for which he declared, I'm against black domination, I'm against white domination. It was very clear in his mind. He was in prison, but it did not take away his freedom. This self-determination and commitment did not change despite the constraint caused by his imprisonment. So if you have to wait until everything is perfect around you, then you act, you will never act. This is what the African version is saying. In fact, true freedom is the persistent struggle against excessive fear, lack of courage, physical or social delimitation, or human design. Human design is one of the most common constraints. But if you have to wait until there's no, like for example, Africans have received their independence, they have so many delimitations. Okay? Like us in Uganda, our money is still made in England and flown by plane to Uganda. Is that not a delimitation? Do we not have the capacity to make our own currency, our money? But we have to get it from our masters, But despite that, we must go on. We are not going to wait until they stop doing it. Freedom is the obedience and commitment to one's inner drives in search for self-realization. You have that inner drive, that inner dream. And if you don't fight for it, you will never realize that dream. That is true freedom. So, it is resistance against internal and external restrictions and pressures, but not its elimination. This is contrary to the view that we must first be set free from constraints for freedom to prevail. Africans think freedom is a self-determination regardless of constraint. This is my version of it. Epistemology now quickly. While a number of African thinkers now accept the existence of African epistemology, this is not yet the case for some of them. Two African authors called, I do not know how to pronounce the name. She's expert there. And Noisiri, they have written their books, for instance, are still obsessed with philosophical method. But also their understanding of universality is wanting. For them to say, no, knowledge is universal. Cannot be regionalized. You cannot have a regional knowledge. Every knowledge is universal. If it is knowledge, it must be knowledge for every human being. So you see, the problem which I see there is that for them, what is universal has no specific bends in specific cultural context. And what is cultural is never universalizable. This means specificity of certain philosophical theories or views as found in specific cultures are negations of universality. So if you have an African knowledge system, that is a negation of universal knowledge. This is logically wrong. They seem to think what is specific must be anti-universal. This way of thinking is incorrect. This is because what is universally true, according to logic, Western logic, and this logic is not only Western, it's logic, can also be particularly true. The law of logic tells us that from the universally true, we can deduce the specifically true and not the other way around. That is why there are some philosophical theories and views that are specifically true in a certain context, but not necessarily universally true. If counting in actually uses base 5, you cannot universalize it. You are not going to force it. It is true, and it cannot be universal, yes. And you have to accept it. We shall now demonstrate this using some selected African language. You see some of these words, as I say, is a condensed value statement. When you say Kichika Iepere, it means literally he has no inner partition. This is it's so condensed that you need almost 2 pages to explain. One, in a normal house, African house, a house is divided into 2. The inside part and where people sit. Anybody who comes sits. The common place where everybody sits in your language, in the English, called the sitting room. All right? The other one is the inner room. Knowledge has 2 dimensions. There are knowledge which are supposed to be publicly known, public knowledge. But there are also knowledge that are not publicly known. Therefore, goods of individuals or groups of individuals. So when they say you only have public, everything you know is just what the public knows. You don't have anything which is unique. You are a weaker person. The central meaning here is that humans have both public knowledge that is useful for survival in human society, but there are also those knowledge items which are unique to an individual by which they become experts and on whose basis they are consulted as specialists of such knowledge. You have a lot of it, even in the West here. They actually would say, bolopukipi, drowning a tortoise in water. You see, they believe that foolishness, which is understood by the children as lack of knowledge, but lack of common knowledge. When you lack what everybody knows, you are a fool. That's what foolishness is. They are not saying you do not know specialized knowledge. You don't have the common knowledge that everybody should know. For example, everybody knows that by throwing a tortoise in water, it is not going to drown. Okay? Because tortoise swims. And they ask you, it comes from a story, a tortoise had done something wrong. Say, now, you want to kill you. I'm going to throw you on a rock. Don't throw me on a rock because my shell is so strong. So, okay, if you won't throw me in water. So, okay, the fool accepts because he doesn't have public knowledge, common knowledge. He throws the tortoise in water and it swims away scotch-free. No problem. But so knowledge should be understood. Even us here, I don't think we know everything about Europe. There's a lot of things. The scientists have it. Technology, there's some knowledge that they will never share. You are in the United States, you are working in the military, you almost have no contact with the common group people because they want to keep specialized knowledge of the military. So, a wise person who is a thinker or a philosopher for that matter knows that a tortoise cannot be drowned in water. Such public knowledge should be common to all. While specialized knowledge is not common to all, and you will not blame somebody for not having a specialized knowledge. Lastly, almost, Okot Pabitek gives another tale. Pumpkin growing in an old homestead is not uprooted. This is a difference between sense knowledge and intellective knowledge. You are excited to go to a new home, so you want to uproot all the plants you planted around your compound. Then you are a fool. Because you are excited about what you see. But what you cannot see is what will happen tomorrow. Where you are going, you might lack no food, and you come back to your home homestead, and you find the pumpkins you had left are the ones that are now ripe, and that's what is going to save you from hunger. Intellective knowledge, you are able to see. But if you only lie about what you see, then there's a problem with you. So again here, sense knowledge, intellective knowledge, according to this, they are complementary. You need both. Nobody relies purely on sense knowledge. Without intellective knowledge. So, but the philosophical meaning is that our sense perception migrating to a new homestead should not blur our perception of what lies ahead, which is only perceivable by our mind, intellective knowledge. And we are saying this is typical, and it is in their Proverbs. Something which I've been teaching in metaphysics, in what about intellective knowledge and sense knowledge, but it is in a proverb captured. Now, the theory of knowledge is that we should not only rely on our sense perception, what we can see and touch, we should equally think of what we cannot see with our eyes, but we can perceive with our minds. To confirm this, the Baganda adds that the one who does not think is like a goat which fails to sit well and all the water pours away. It is in this book, that's why I've written my name there. The theory of knowledge is that intellective knowledge, which is a result of reflective thinking, helps humans become wise and avoid silly mistakes. Now, the last part is moral philosophy, which is again a very interesting area. But here, there's a lot of discussion. I'm just jumping into the discussion straight away. I am uncomfortable with the discrepancies among African philosophers trying to distinguish. They say in African philosophy, we must distinguish between partiality and impartiality, agent relativity, agent neutrality. You read that work. There's a lot of, and I've given those names. These are people I've read and I've seen. That's where for me, I think they're wasting a lot of time. But it's also good that they bring it out so that we know that they're actually wasting time. This line of thinking is related to the argument of an author called Ran Iron. This is a lady, I think. Distinguish between rational self-interest and altruism. For her, say, we have a problem when we always think acting for the good of others, which is altruism, is always better than acting for ourselves, okay? And we should always act for our self-interest. But it should be rational self-interest. Not always to think about the others. What Rand forgets, I'm just summarizing because I went into the book, I went deeper. What Rand forgets to address is whether rational self-interest should not also be balanced with rational social interest. Meaning, when one is rationally justified to act in favor of self-interest, one can equally be rationally justified for acting in favor of social interest. They don't need always to be antithesis to one another. However, my point of departure springs from the understanding that to be a member of society, and this is what I from my studies, I found out that to be a member of society in African perspective, we have two ways of understanding. We have the immediate society with whom an individual is connected by blood or by other social relations, very close to you, like your wife, your children. That's the first community you have. But you also have the community outside that. In one of my articles, which is not among this book, I talk about ethics in African context. And I brought out this point very, 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 very strongly. Now, it is only when you understand this, then you will understand when a decision is to be made, for which of this society will an African decide? Will it be for the immediate family or for the family outside? Then African philosophers are arguing either or. Some are saying, no. Altruism is the true meaning of African ethics. I said, no. It is not altruism. It is working for self-interest. So they are battling around that field. But my argument is to say an African often prefers the first type of bond, the closer family ties. It is, in this case, I want to agree, it is in line with Ayn Rand. This would also be in line with the first aspect of African moral philosophy, which is invoking communally shared moral beliefs and presuppositions by people below the South of Sahara. You know, in Africa, you all know very well, in Nigeria, two individuals are fighting at the marketplace. When one comes from Yoruba, another one comes from maybe another, it sparks a whole tribal war. And that's what I've been trying to explain in one of my ideas. Why? The real problem is just the difference between who does one consider to be a member of my society, the close one, and one is outside. So long as she is a member of my society, I will always work in her interest, and morally I will be considered to have done right. Genocide that took place in Rwanda, the same. A lot of wars taken right now in Rwanda, they're killing each other, the same. But let me not go there because I would have explained more, but we don't have time. But more importantly, African moral philosophy is also an intellectual reflection and deliberations on the moral beliefs and presuppositions. African moral philosophy is not just about identifying the preferences of Africans, but also an attempt to find a rational justification for these attitudes and practices. And I'm going to give example to illustrate that. In my view, African moral philosophy is both partial and impartial, because it will become partial if they choose the good of an insider other than an outsider, and it will become impartial when you choose the good of humanity or values that goes beyond individuals and groups' interest. Then it becomes impartial. But look at it carefully. Let's go slowly. Below are some proverbs that can help us to understand these dimensions. I have divided this group of proverbs into two. One is proverbs surrounding private property. The other one, proverbs surrounding public property. And let us just see it. When an actually say, Abalo Panga, whose property have I spoiled? It is, the context has to be understood. You know, in Africa, they grow millet, particularly among the Cholis. When millet is grown, it is ripening. But that's the time when it's not yet fully ripe. But there's hunger. You need food for your children. You go and harvest it when it is about to get ripe, but it's not yet fully ripe. the outsiders will describe you as spoiling your millet. But then the person said, but whose have I spoiled? Okay? Whose? It is mine. And that's also similar to what they say, no one disputes the ownership of a guinea fowl with the owner of the trap or snare in which it has been trapped. What is private is private. What is for the good of your family is for the good of your family. Nobody should dispute it. Nobody should dispute it. And when you do it, you are not acting amorally or you are more immorally. It looks partial, yes, but it is right. There's nothing wrong in supporting your family, taking care of your children. First, you must take care of them. There's a family in Uganda recently. The husband gave let us say 500 euros. Just any figure. Then this lady, what she did, she said, pay rent, pay school fees for my children. But this lady took it to the pastor, the pastor of the area. So I want you to pray over it so that it multiplies. So the pastor said, oh, you are a good Christian. You pocket the money. The children of this man were sent away from school. Do you think that is morally right? We all have a duty towards our immediate families, and there's nothing wrong with it. In Africa, nobody takes it. That's a mistake. Because that's your first responsibility. You are not going to take care of a third party when your family is dying. Cannot be right. But this is not all, and that's the point. And the Baganda put it even very interesting. Water that has been begged for does not quench thirst. Suppose I'm from hunting and I'm very thirsty, I want to drink water. But then I beg some, can you give me a glass of water? Then the person gives you one glass of water. But that you are just so thirsty that you needed more. But because you are begged, you are going to become shy. Now she has already given me. Can I keep asking? So, what is begged does not quench thirst. But if that water is yours, you can drink as many glasses as you want. That's the meaning. There's nothing wrong in meeting. And so Ayn Rand was bringing an issue here, and many African philosophers want to enter in that discussion. Africans are either impartial or partial. There's nothing. When you are partial, you are rationally partial. It is right because you have a reason to be partial. All right? But you must have a reason. That's why it is ethics. Then in Kiswahili is a very interesting say. It is better yours which is little than borrowed. And they really mean it. Mine might be little, yours might be more, but that one is mine. It's mine. It's more satisfying. Now we look at the other side of the coin, which is public property. The actualists would say, when you're in charge of public property, your way of behavior should be different. Let us imagine you are a banker, you are taking care of people's money, and every time you keep picking the money, okay? Picking the money. Do you think that money, let us say in 2 years, 5 years, will remain the same? No. And that's why they say dripping, finish the corn sack. It is in the context of keeping seeds for growing. The seed is for the good of the whole family. But because you feel that you need to eat the seed, you take it and cook it. Today, after 2 days, you take again and cook. In the final analysis, there will be no seeds to plant. The effect does not affect only you. It affects the entire family. The banker who takes money, which is not his, is only in custody, affects the entire community. A president that takes money for himself and does not care, he steals the money. You are in charge of public. There you must be impartial. That's what the Africans are saying here. Oh, and this is, I'm coming to the end almost. This is what they say. All men sit under a tree because they planted the tree many years before. You want to sit under a tree? Plant it now. But what is even more interesting about altruism, which is also in one of they say planting a tree you know you will never sit under. That is true altruism. I'm planting this tree. I'm 100% sure by the time it grows big, I will not be there anymore. That is true. Some people call it patriotism. That's true impartiality. You do things that you know you are not going to benefit, but others are the ones going to benefit. So these two thinking are deeply buried in the African societies. And for me, that is the essence of what true morality is. I must act for my self-interest, it must be rationally justified. I must act for common interest, it must be rationally justified. I must do it because that's the right thing to do. African moral philosophy is not just either partiality or impartiality. It is also not just agent relativity and agent neutrality, because they are both. That's the African perspective. So, now here is almost a summary of what I'm saying. Rational self-interest and rational social interest. Proverbs for rational self-interest are this is a very interesting saying, by the way. It's very strong among the Choli. When they are holding the bow and arrow of the king, have also your own. Because when you are in the thick of the fight, the king will say, give my bow. You will be left without anything. And you become very vulnerable. So when you are holding the weapon of the king, make sure you have also your own. This is rational self-interest. Hold the balls of the king, but also have your own. Then the last one is even much more interesting. Dreams of a fool get finished by giving it out for people just to taste how nice it is. Okay? You go to sell your local brew. In Africa, it's very common. But before people buy, they say, let me first taste it. So this one taste goes without buying. Another one taste goes without. By the time you realize the drink is finished and you are left with no money. That is lack of rational self-interest. It must be reasonable. And there are so many proverbs there. That a generous woman is infected with gonorrhea, with disease. Yes. Because you are not rationally thinking about what you are doing. Proverbs for rational social interest I'm now giving the other side, and then I almost conclude. Say, a lonely buffalo is easy to kill. You think you are strong, you don't need the support of the group. Let that buffalo get alone. The lion will come over, 4 or 5 days, will be gone. But when you are together, they put their horns together, they protect each other. A lonely buffalo is easy to kill. Then, in the same context, say, doing something wrong is only proper for a kite. See, a kite comes and takes people's chicks, and fly away, and you cannot bring them to book. But human beings, you do anything wrong, you will come back to the community to account. You will be asked, why did you do it? So you must think about what you do. So it's only kites that snatch chicks and fly away scotch-free, but not humans. Because humans will always need other humans to account to and to survive. So now, in conclusion, I can say, truly, Proverbs help us to understand better the different dimensions of African philosophy. As the Nigerians say, Proverbs are like the kola nut with which words are eaten. I don't know whether it is in your language or another, I don't know. It's like kola nut with which words are eaten. So they are polite ways to convey very serious truth in a way that is friendly. The examples we have given above range from metaphysics to epistemology to ethics. But whether they fall in ethics is also my skill and ability. Another philosopher could put them anywhere. It depends how they interpret them. I don't care whether they will follow my step, but so long as they critically look at them, find what it means, and able to derive. So, in metaphysics, we have shown examples. In epistemology, we have shown examples. And in ethics, we have also given examples. Indeed, proverbs are really condensed value statements or knowledge idioms of different cultural communities in Africa. In these idioms, we find value statements that are philosophically deep and original to the particular African cultural communities. Our hope is that more of such studies be carried out to enrich the content of African philosophy in general and African philosophical sagacity in particular. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your lecture and giving us insights into some selected African proverbs and the philosophical dimension of proverbs. So the floor is open now for questions, comments, critique. So if you... Okay, please.
Thank you very much for your lesson. I have one question. The proverbs you described have been related to humankind. And I was interested, even if they were about nature, if there are proverbs which are especially related to the relationship between human and nature. That would be interesting to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay. I can pick some, then I answer them together.
Thank you very much. I have 2 or 3 points, I'm not sure. The first is what a philosophical discipline is, seems to me an historical open question. For example, today very often people are talking about a new, I think a quite new discipline, philosophy of mind, which is different to the older discipline, philosophy of psychology, I think. So only as an example, and you used for your categorization of dividing the proverbs, very big traditional disciplines of philosophy. And are there also in your work with the proverbs disciplines that are other and that are not matching in these big old disciplines? Yeah, like this new tension between, as an example, between philosophy of mind and philosophy of psychology. First question was this, and the second is a very special one, because I am passionate about fools in philosophy. I think the fools in this tradition, and this medieval tradition, to say critical things to the powerful people. I'm passionate about it, like the antique Diogenes in the Tonne. I don't know. Yeah, but this is only an example. And now in 2 proverbs they worked with a dichotomy between the wise human being and the fool. And the first, it was It was this proverb about drowning a tortoise in water, and you said that this fool does not know common knowledge. And I think, because you said before that philosophy comes from a questioning mind, and I think it's very important to question this so-called common knowledge. So the fool is a philosopher. It's my thesis. And the second thing about fool was also interesting, but I will keep it to this. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I think this is also good. Proverbs, which I gave, seem to refer to humankind. What about their relation to other things, okay? To other realities, plans, etc. Definitely, that is why I say this is just a beginning of a study, all right? When you choose Proverbs, you are more limited by the choice you have made before. But if I were to come with the book of Proverbs, which they cover almost all areas of life, and that's why I say not all of them may be philosophical. Some could just be relational. Some could be other things. So if I did not mention them, it was intentional choice, because mine was kind of prefigured by the choices I made. All right, let us first start with the known disciplines of philosophy, all right? And when we have digested them, you never know, other people might be provoked to begin looking into some proverbs in other relations, which in my view is not fully in this book. This book basically captured proverbs in relation to humans and their way of thinking. So I have to accept the limitation. It cannot talk about everything. And this does not mean the other studies could not have done it. They can do it. So for me, I don't have a direct answer for it, but that's just only to say sorry. Then number 2, what is a philosophical discipline? And are there no other discipline other than the traditional one, which we already know? Logic, what? Metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, what? Yeah, definitely in my book here, if one were to look at all the chapters, some are traditional, yes, but not as traditional as you think. The first introduction to this book, the second one is about logic, which is traditional, right? The third one is about moral philosophy, which is also traditional. The fourth is political philosophy, which is also traditional. The fifth is social, yes. There's also theory of knowledge, there's also metaphysics. But I also brought in philosophy of beauty, all right? Which I discussed in details, but I could not give all these examples. And that's a very, very, very interesting understanding. Beauty from the African perspective is totally slightly different from what, like in the West, we think beauty is a symmetrical proportionality in an object, all right? But in African, according to Kurt Pabitek and many others, beauty is moral. Beauty is harmony with nature, with other beings. A beautiful woman is a woman who knows how to relate with others. A handsome man is a man who knows how to relate with others. It's not only about your proportionality. Okay, so in this book, I talk about 3 types of beauty: physical beauty, moral beauty, and social beauty. Social beauty is harmony in society. Okay? You can have a lot of wealth, but if there's no harmony in that society, there's no beauty in that society. Okay? And most people are taken up a little bit much more about physical beauty. But in Africa, emphasis is much more about moral beauty. And that's why any human can be considered to be beautiful, depending on their moral dispositions, how they relate to others. And that is not traditional philosophy. And I discuss it in detail here. All right? And also even under social philosophy, there's an aspect where, let me see, where I talk about, just a second. Yeah, I talk about proverbs surrounding women, all right? I found it was very, very, very interesting. It's far different from some of the common slogans which are given about African women. I wish I could identify. role, let me see if it is this or what.
But we have still.
Yeah, there are still others. Okay. So anyway, to answer that question, I think that is. So and then lastly, it is interesting you talk about fools. You think fools are also philosophers? Yeah, thinking is the engine of philosophy. But of course, these fools which are described here in terms of categorization, that if something is supposed to be known by everybody, all right? You are the only one who do not know. The society describes you as foolish. And that's exactly what we are saying. Fool is a very perspectival definition. Because it depends on who is talking. If there is something which is expected that you should know. Because foolishness is different from ignorance. Ignorance is lack of knowledge. Which are not exactly the same. So I think that one I understand, and maybe you give time for other people to ask more questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we already have 2 more questions on the other side. And then Francesca.
Yeah, thank you for your lecture. I would like to ask whether you ever related the so-called ordinary language philosophy to the proverbs, like in Wittgenstein and Austin, because they are trying to show how the practices of language creates meaning, just in practicing the language. And I would be very interested also, how are the situations where these proverbs are used? Are they commenting? Are they judging? Are they prohibiting? Are they and so on? I think they create different speech acts, and that would be for me quite interesting. What kind of speech acts and in what kind of situations they occur. No? So, just a simple question: whether you ever related this ordinary language philosophy to the practice, the practice of proverbs in the African languages.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Lajul, for the lecture. I have 2 questions. You spoke a lot about that proverbs are condensed knowledge, and this word condensed express knowledge of expression in general. So can you relate poetry and proverbs? It's something it's a connection that would work for you. And you also spoke about individuality in a sense that reminds me of the singularity in a physics, in terms of physics, and really raw explained in general, singularity in the sense that this is like an event that happens only once, and that's it. So I had the feeling with individuality, you said something like that, and I wanted to ask if I understood well this aspect of your individuality concept.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I address this one first, yeah. Okay, again, thank you, Professor. I think this is also a good question. Well, with this book, particularly which is the basis of my presentation, the emphasis was not so much ordinary language, but I have another book which has already been published, and it is Philosophy, Language, and Literature in an African Context. There we discuss a lot, and that is where language came in much, much more. Of course, now, so in that book was not oral language, okay, was now written language. The written language, and that is where we found the written language of African literature writers, whether they are drama, and whether they are poetry, or whether they are novels, really has to be understood in certain contexts. Many times people read them outside context. They read them as, for example, we are reading ordinary literature, all right? But this literature are heavily pregnant with meanings that come from the society in which they are developed. The language are used in a certain context. Again, that one really is an area. But in this book, I want to confess, the language, you cannot understand proverb outside the language, all right? But the emphasis was not about how ordinary language factors in to bring philosophic sagacity, okay? That area is not there. It's not there in that book, because I cannot say it is there while it is not there. Because that was not the aim. The aim was to look at language, actually, proverbs, while saying, are heavily embedded within given languages with certain clear context. That's why some of these, if you do not know the context, it would be difficult to derive their meanings. Okay? It has become difficult to derive their meaning. But their meaning can only be derived in that language. What do they mean by that? Sometimes it looks so simple, but it is probably sometimes like the end of a long story. It's as a conclusion to a long story. And if you do not understand what goes on in that language, you will not be able to interpret it rightly. So again, there, I want to appreciate there, we did not look at ordinary language in this book, all right? But in the other book, at least it looks at language at a much deeper level. Then the second question, where are these proverbs used? You know, that's exactly where the social context comes in. The social contexts are very important. Most of these proverbs, if you don't understand the social context, it becomes very difficult to get their interpretations. Because it's not just something that I can Google and get this, the meaning, it will be the literal meaning. And my main problem also is that most translations these days are mainly, structural, all right? The context is totally left out. The real meaning, actually this morning I was reading something and I found it was very, very interesting. I read 3 words in German: Welt, Kultur, and Erbe. Okay? When they stand by themselves, I tried, so what does this mean? But then you understand then the world and cultural heritage. You see now? But if you do not understand the English equivalent, you can be very literal. You just say world, culture, heritage. But actually it should be one kind of sentence. You see now? That is really the context. Because I saw one of the pictures of one of the beautiful churches in Hildesheim, and they wrote Welt, Kultur, and then Erbe. I said, okay, what does this mean? I did some German. I know a bit of German, but sometimes I'm very philosophical. That's why. But you see, you must not be so philosophical to get language. You must get the context in which they use. And then, so again here, that is what I would say. Of course, and that's why also the proverbs are selected, all right? When you go to the 5,000 Uganda proverbs, it talks about all kinds of things. Prohibiting proverbs, proverbs to do with habits, okay? Eating habits, marriage habit, relationship. There is a lot. But people have written and put them together. We need serious studies. So there's still a lot to be done in African philosophy, so that we get these things clear. But somebody somewhere has to start. Then coming to Proverbs is condensed value statement, and that's really true. Of course, your interest is to know the relationship between poetry and proverbs. Though that's not my area of specialty, but the issue really here is really like proverbs, like poetry. Poetry is not written just like that. It comes out. There's somebody, one of my students, is a very good poet. He was a philosopher, but he writes poetry. It comes like magic in his head. When the ideas are coming, he just writes. All right? The other day, Professor Boni tried to explain to you. But the truth is that even when you are creating poetry in relation to philosophy, in relation to philosophy. Deep at the back of your mind, you should know that it's the creativity of the mind in relationship to the environment, to your body, to what you feel. There are a lot of things which goes on together. But that creativity is marvelous because it's also about realities which sometimes affect you positively or negatively. So they're already, and in some of the proverbs are results of creative thinking. So again, to distinguish, this is a result of poetical thinking. This is difficult, but definitely they're all, they affect one another. That's what I can say. Then lastly, what about individuality? Really, individuality here, of course, if you have done physics, you may turn in terms, but really that's not what we will. An individual is, let us say from the point of view of human, it's a unit of life, all right? This unit of life, if you take it from the African point of view, from the time it's conceived in Africa, you do not know the happiness it used to be. Not these days, because these things have changed. It brings joy. An individual is being expected. A human being. And that's why in Africa, you go into their cultures, even when an abortion takes place, they will have a right to bury it. Because they consider to be a distinct entity of life. All right? So it depends on the philosophy of a given people. But if you consider it to be a fetus, bunch of flesh, you will have a different understanding of it. So it's not really so much about the atomic, the atoms, how they are combined together to form. That would not be the area of philosophy. Philosophy is a little bit more reflective to go to. That's what I can say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Our time for today is up. We have the pleasure tomorrow morning to continue in the format of a research talk, our discussion. I, for example, would like to ask the question tomorrow then, what do you think about doing such kind of research in Europe, analyzing European proverbs under a philosophical perspective, and what do you think would be the outcome? Okay, that's it for today. Next week will be our last lecture of the semester, and Rolf and me agreed that we will do a shared lecture here together, give a kind of summary of what we learned, but maybe also present our own understanding of philosophy. And then we would like also to come with you into discussion after we did our presentations, and all opinions about this lecture series are also welcome then to present or to discuss with us what are your impressions of this lecture series of this semester. I wish you a nice evening, hope to see all of you back tomorrow. Next week, on Thursday. Tomorrow only the team of our center. And yeah, have a good night, and see you next week.
Thank you.